Coming up today, award-winning speaker, educator, author and musician Will Tuttle discusses his spiritual approach to vegan education. Rebecca from the Reasonable Vegan website and Rob, the author of Rationality, argue that all advocacy should be partaken using rational reasoning only.
Will Tuttle, author of The World Peace Starts, incorporates spiritual New Age arguments into his vegan advocacy. We discuss that and more with him. So you speak in your book about eating for spiritual health. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean by that, Ruth, is essentially ethical health, I would say, in many ways. Spirituality is really about our connection with the larger wholes that we're a part of, with the Earth's ecosystems, with the cosmos, with the interconnected consciousness that we're part of. And so, as soon as we are reducing our consciousness, we're reducing our awareness. If I say to someone, "Would you like to know where your bacon comes from?" and they say, "No, I don't want to know. I want to enjoy my bacon. Don't tell me." That's a profoundly anti-spiritual attitude and approach, because it's basically saying, okay, I want to reduce my consciousness. I want to reduce my awareness. I want to go numb. I want to not be aware. I want to be a robot. I want to just do what I'm told. And I don't want to understand what I'm doing. I don't want to see the larger picture. I don't want to understand when I take out my wallet and pay for bacon, I'm paying someone somewhere to horribly abuse animals and to destroy ecosystems, and a whole flood of devastating effects are happening. So I think, to me, spirituality is awakening to our true nature. And our true nature is not that we're an object, a thing, just this biomechanical, chemical machine that science, so-called science, tells us we are. I think it's very obvious to see that we live in a society that is based on animal agriculture. So it's based on materialism. It's based on a religion that if you can't measure it, then it doesn't exist. I mean, this is a profoundly primitive way of seeing that the only thing that exists is something that can be seen or measured by the physical senses. And this is enormously primitive, and it's just an automatic, natural result of a society that's been killing and reducing animals to pieces of meat, to physical things, to matter, to reducing animals to mere matter. To just see, you don't see a cow. When we see a cow, we don't just see a being. We don't see a being who's worthy of respect and kindness and who is the subject of her life, as we are. We see a T-bone steak. We see beef. I mean, we see matter. So, and then we look at each other and we just see matter. I mean, I was taught this as a kid growing up in the sports locker rooms, to learn when I was, 14 or 15 years old, to see see girls as mere pieces of meat, objects to be used sexually. And we learned to see other human beings as objects to be used in a heartless economic system. It's commodity, we want to sell something to them. We reduce. And animal agriculture is about reducing beings to things, and materialist science and materialist philosophy and thinking is the same thing. And spirituality is waking up out of that, seeing the eternal beauty of the infinite consciousness that is our true nature, and respecting that in ourselves and others, and making an effort to embark upon an adventure of understanding and living our lives as adventures of awakening, and not reducing everything to rational, logical, linear thinking, but realizing that we have an intuition, we have the possibility for spiritual insights where we can look at a deeper level and see the interconnectedness of all living beings.
You appeal to stereotypically feminine values such as compassion and emotional intelligence, and suggest the rational mind can't comprehend many important levels of our predicament. In which ways do you feel a purely rational approach to animal rights is lacking, and is it antithetical to veganism?
That's a great question. I think the whole point is that rationality is a wonderful tool, and it's profoundly rational to go vegan. I mean, it's rational on every level. It makes total sense. It's reasonable. It's logical. It's intellectually sound. We're creating a much better world for everyone, including ourselves. So it's a totally logical, rational thing to do. But the thing I've discovered over the years is that most people going vegan, they do it because of something in their heart awakens. They realize this is a being, and I'm not going to do it. And this has a motivation. This has a power. I mean, I know that's how it was for me when I realized the suffering, the violence that eating animal foods causes, and I knew these are beings. It's not rational. I mean, it's awareness. It's the heart opening directly and intuiting another living being and connecting. It's just making this connection. And I think we utterly, disempower the vegan movement if we try to stay on the shallow, rational level of things. I mean, that's not going to get anywhere. We're not rational beings. I mean, it's obvious. If we were rational, we'd all go vegan. But there's a much deeper, there's a lot of deeper forces at play, and the fear that people have of being different, the social pressures that people feel, the sense of connectedness that people feel with the memories that they have when they were little kids of their mother loving them and feeding them meat or dairy or whatever. These deep memories, all these things we have to take into consideration. And I think one of the points I make in the World Peace Diet is that the act of being forced to eat animal foods as little kids, it really reduces our capacities for example, making connections. It makes us, more reductionistic. But one of the main things it does is it directly represses what I refer to in the World Peace Diet as Sophia, which is Sophia was the ancient Greek goddess of wisdom. The word means wisdom. It's the feminine wisdom within men and women that spontaneously and irrationally just loves, loves life, loves the children, and will give, a mother will give herself and do almost anything for her kids, even though they're nothing but trouble to her. But she'll just give of herself, and this deep inner wisdom of loving and protecting life in the family, in the community, in the neighborhood. That's the foundation of a healthy society. But eating animal foods essentially squashes that. It pushes that down. It makes us not care, not think deeply, not feel deeply, not care deeply for others. And so I think really what veganism is, in many ways, is the resurrection of the sacred feminine. We see that happening, this sense of caring about life, a sense of looking more deeply, of not being just a robotic machine confined to a shallow program of rational thinking, but an adventurous, alive, deep-feeling, passionate, aware being who's living a life of purpose and meaning and part of a much larger unfolding. I think we've had that stripped away from us by a science and a technology and a way of thinking that is based in animal agriculture and dominating and reducing beings to just mere units.
A rationalist critic might say adhering to vegan stereotypes of the hippie may be harmful to our credibility. Could arguing on behalf of the metaphysical open us to being discredited as a serious ethical position? I think the most important thing is to combine the sense of the larger order, the connectedness of the larger order, which I think resonates with any human being who's at all still not wounded so deeply that they don't connect with that anymore, and with the rational too. I mean, the World Peace Diet and all my talks it's all about the logic of veganism. I mean, it's essential to understand the devastating consequences of animal agriculture to our health, to the environment, to animals, to wildlife, to future generations, to workers, all these different levels. And those are all things you can quantify and talk about very rationally and so forth. But I think at a deeper level, it's important for us to reclaim as vegans not just the moral high ground of caring about beings that most people don't care about, but also to reclaim the beauty and dignity of life beyond just being a material machine.
And if people want to use that, if anybody wants to use that as a reason for discrediting the vegan movement, then, I mean, you can use anything as a reason to discredit the vegan movement. You can say, well, I think vegans are, they're too superior. They think they're superior, so I'm not going to do it. Well, so then what do you do? So then you say, all right, I'm not superior. I mean, I think it's just the opposite. I mean, being vegan is saying I'm not superior. I'm actually, caring about beings that most people don't care about. So it's, in a sense, it's the opposite of that. But people will find whatever they want to find to try to continue in a program that in many ways is not in their best interest. And I think our job as vegans is to embody what veganism is as deeply as we can, which is love. I mean, essentially, that's what it is. There's no, justice. Justice is a very powerful concept, but justice has no meaning outside of a deeper affect. The affect is compassion or love or caring. That's what gives rise to justice. Without that, there wouldn't be. Without that, justice is just it's an empty, hollow. It's never going to happen. But once we have a sense of loving kindness and a sense of inclusion of other living beings, it comes really from a deep feeling. Then the mind will get on board with justice and the importance of not treating them in another way, because we make the connection. But that has to be made intuitively. That's something that we have to awaken to. And if we don't awaken to it, we can rationalize injustice forever. That's what we've been doing. We rationalize slavery of humans, of animals, all these things. But once we actually, for a moment, can see, once our eyes are opened and we see directly, then we are no longer going to be able to do those kinds of rationalizations anymore. So I don't think that's anything that the vegan movement should be concerned about. I mean, I'm certainly not concerned about it.
Hi, I'm Peter Vegan Power Ebden, former world snooker champion, and when I'm taking a break from making breaks, I tune into the Species Barrier radio show on Siren 107.3 FM.
Reductionist science, such as that of Descartes, comes in for criticism in your book. Isn't it also true that while some scientists reflect troubling cultural and speciesist attitudes, science also brought us the Cambridge Declaration of Consciousness, etc., a far from reductionist statement that other animals are just as conscious as we are and deserve the consideration they merit as sentient beings?
Yes. Great. Yeah, no, I totally agree. One of the wonderful things, of course, I mean, science is like any institution in our society. It has two sides. I mean, at least, or probably more. But there are people within science who are working very hard to continue the enslavement and domination of animals, and there are people within science who are working very hard to liberate us from these attitudes, and are doing research to help show how animals are conscious and aware subjects of their lives, and other scientists working to show that we don't need to eat them at all to have nutritional, viability. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think science is, the main problem with science, really, especially today, is that it's very easily co-opted by money and by the media and powerful interests. And so, scientists are very often under pressure to conform to a status quo that is not in the best interest of animals or future generations, and work on projects that are not helpful. So I think it's very important for us to develop a healthy skepticism of science, but also to support research that is in alignment with understanding the bigger picture of our relationship with animals and of their sentience.
What kinds of different reactions has your approach received from different audiences?
Well, I'd say essentially, the most profound reaction I seem to be getting is people going vegan. People saying, I just love hearing it. People say, well, I read your book, I went to your lecture, and now I'm vegan. So that's the main impact I seem to get. I mean, people, I guess, obviously people who don't go vegan don't say anything, so I don't hear from them. But a lot of people have said to me that it's impossible to actually read the World Peace Diet and not go vegan. I mean, if you actually read the book and actually, deeply enough to open to the message, it's pretty hard not to go vegan. I mean, a lot of people will start the book and then just put it down and not read it anymore. But I think if, as soon as anyone actually opens themselves, any human being with any sense of kindness or awareness or sense of even of justice, it's really difficult not to move our lives in that direction towards veganism. And I think that anyone who moves in the direction of veganism, usually it's not just one factor that makes someone move in that direction. Usually it's many factors. So what I'm trying to do, I'm not trying to actually make anyone go vegan at all. I don't want to make anybody do anything. What I'm trying to do essentially with my life and work is to simply to plant seeds. That's all I can do. I can live my life as best I can to be an expression of vegan values. And vegan values are, to me, the ancient values that are espoused by all the wisdom traditions on this planet. Ahimsa, which means nonviolence. It's nonviolence. It's loving kindness. It's caring. It's mercy. It's tenderness. It's gentleness. It's freedom. These are the values of veganism. And so to do the best I can to live that in my life, and then to share that message and plant seeds. And if people resonate with that message, then they will, in their own way and in their own time, move in that direction. And I think that's as long as we are authentically making an effort to live what veganism is ourselves, that to me is the most important thing. Not necessarily try to change other people, because we have to live this. And I think Gandhi was right. He said there can never be any positive change, social change, without positive personal change. And to really make the emphasis to embody what vegan living actually is myself in my life, so that every word and gesture is in alignment with the way I'm living and how I'm acting in my relationships with other people in daily life. I think that's really the foundation of a movement that will absolutely be unstoppable and will be utterly victorious. And without that, without the actual transformation of people so that we're living lives of kindness and respect for all animals, and that means not just animals, but human animals, that we're living our lives with kindness and respect in all our relations with all other living beings, even those we disagree with. Once we get to that point where we're living this at a deeper level, I think our movement will become unstoppable. I think it already is unstoppable eventually. This is our true nature, but I think it's very important for us to take it seriously, the injunction to embody vegan values.
Religious beliefs are notoriously selective and open to interpretation. Various claims are made, such as thou shalt not kill, Jesus' dietary status, and the diet laid down in the Garden of Eden story. Is using these often contradictory mythical texts to promote veganism a legitimate angle?
I think it's not something that I use much myself. I think perhaps people, for example, if they're talking with Christians or directly to certain groups, it might be helpful perhaps to try to illustrate some of these things with those scriptures. But for the most part, a lot of these scriptures are, there's always two different sides. I remember, it's very clear to me, living in the United States, that the memory is still here that in the 1800s, people used the Bible to justify slavery. That was well done, and people today use the Bible to justify eating meat and dairy. And so I would kind of point that out to people, that we can use religious scriptures to justify things that are totally contrary to the actual spiritual teaching of kindness and compassion, which is really the foundational teaching. And that's the most important discussion to have, is how we can live this at a deeper level. For me, as a Buddhist, it's a little different, because in the Buddhist tradition, it's a little more clear that it's about not causing harm to other sentient beings. So it's a little more clear, it's less ambiguous, and I think these teachings can help people move toward veganism if we articulate them well. So I do think more and more that people, since there are so many Christians, I have friends that talk about this, and since there are like 2 billion, I think it is, Christians in the world, that every social justice movement to actually make any headway has got to enroll the religious people in it, and so I think, I speak a lot, at more progressive churches, like Unitarian churches, these are more progressive. But I found, in those churches, people are still really dragging their feet on this in many ways. Even though they are concerned about social justice, they still want to eat their meat, So we try to bring in whatever we can in the language of the people to support them in planting seed, basically to plant seeds that will resonate with them. So I think we have to use our intuition to know what to say in situations. I mean, what's going to really resonate with someone who's a Christian, what kind of teaching would be best for them. But I think we have to definitely find a way to speak to people where they can't just write it off. And I think the most important thing is to try to speak in the language they can understand.
Could you tell us about your book, Circles of Compassion, that came out in 2015?
Oh, yeah, that's a new book. And basically, I'm the editor of that book. There's 30 authors. I wrote the preface and the afterword, and I have an essay in there, and basically organized the whole thing. But it's focused on intersectionality, which is sort of an emerging academic discipline, looking at and focusing on the connection between various forms of social justice issues, various forms of social injustice, and making the connections between speciesism, for example, which is human attitudes of domination and exploitation of non-human animals, and connections between speciesism and racism and sexism, heterosexism, classism, ableism. And so we have very well-known leaders in these fields of social justice talking about the connection between human violence and exploitation of other humans and human violence and exploitation of other animals. And to me, it's just a fascinating study. And people have really loved this book. Like I say, it's a groundbreaking book in the sense that we're really starting to make those connections explicit between violence towards animals and in many ways the resulting violence in our relationships with each other. And of course, I laid a lot of the foundations for that in the World Peace Diet as well.
So where can people find you online, and where can they buy your books?
The basic website is worldpeacediet.com, and that has our tour schedule on there. So if people want to see where we're giving lectures and so forth, you can just go to worldpeacediet.com. As far as buying the books, I mean, they're available online at Amazon and the usual online retailers. I think we have an audio book, which is me reading the entire book. We have also ebooks, Kindle version and so forth. They're available on iTunes and in the audiobook and so forth. And I think there's a distributor, Deep Books in London, for the books in England, so it should be available in bookstores, or you can order it from bookstores. So the books are available both online and in traditional bookstores as well.
Wellness salute, this Stickman from Dead Prez, shouting out 107.3 FM. You are listening to the Species Barrier. Rise up.
Rebecca Fox runs a website entitled The Reasonable Vegan. She takes issue with some of Will's methods and instead suggests that all messages should be grounded in the physical world.
Hello Rebecca, welcome to the show. You run rvgn.org, a site, one of the few vegan resources which actually promotes a rational focus. What prompted you to start the site?
Well, RVGN stands for Reasonable Vegan, and to me that just makes sense. Reasonableness and veganness kind of go together. So when we say reasonable, we mean adhering to the rules of logic and following evidence, but also kind of sensible, fair, open-minded, polite, just all those good things too. And the reason why they go together for me is because skepticism led me to veganism. So when I say skepticism, I mean sort of critical thinking, like questioning whether claims are supported by evidence and paying careful attention to how to evaluate evidence and applying the scientific method and, just learning how to spot logical flaws. And I saw a really big logical flaw in how I was living my life as a vegetarian, which I'd been since I was young. Basically, when I realized that the reason I was vegetarian is because I cared about animals and cared about their suffering, and dairy and egg industry, and goodness knows what else, honey, all these things that I was partaking in, was causing so much suffering. So it was my skepticism that made me vegan. And when I entered the vegan community, I didn't see much skepticism around. In fact, I kind of saw the opposite. I don't know if you guys have noticed this.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite a lot of irrationality, which is a real shame because it projects outwards and it makes us look kind of unreasonable, which makes us worse advocates. If we're trying to speak about veganism and want to be taken seriously, we have to be perceived as a reasonable community, and unfortunately we're not. I'm not saying that's entirely our fault, but maybe partially our fault, so we wanted to kind of make a bit of a difference there and protect our community, because obviously, like, there's all sorts of kind of gadgets and trinkets being sold to people with false promises that are based on pseudoscience. And I hate to see those being sold to vegans. It really upsets me when I see someone paying a fortune for something that doesn't work, might actually hurt them or stop them from getting real medicine. And when I see those things being sold in vegan fairs, it upsets me. So, long story short, I got to talking to a few other reasonable vegans or skeptical vegans at different critical thinking conferences I was attending, and we thought we needed to create a place to have these conversations and to promote a skeptical vegan philosophy or a reasonable vegan philosophy. And that's what we came up with. So we've been doing it for about a year now.
So what kind of reaction have you had to the site from vegans or otherwise?
It's actually been really good. We were a bit worried that people would think that we were being too critical or too harsh, but we tried to focus on promoting our view and promoting science and critical thinking and reasonableness instead of criticising what people are doing, although inevitably we have criticised some people and some approaches, but generally we're focused on pushing the positive message of critical thinking. And we've just had people come to us. We've had a lot of emails. I man the email accounts, so every so often I get an email from someone who's like, I thought I was the only one out there who'd seen all this, and I thought I was the only one who was upset about such and such, and it makes me feel really good because I'm making these connections and I'm realising that there's a much bigger community out there of skeptical vegans than I thought. And it's actually leading me to think maybe there's more and more coming, more and more skeptics becoming vegan or becoming interested in vegan issues, because people like Sam Harris and Steven Pinker, all these people you wouldn't think would have an interest are suddenly talking about it. But then, being a skeptic, I kind of check myself and think maybe that's just confirmation bias. I'm just paying attention to what I want to pay attention to, so who knows. But yeah, so it's been good, and we want to become bigger. We want to do more in-person advocacy, and we want to arrange meetups and maybe put together some resources for people to use which are science-based, so that anyone, any vegan can pick them up and know that what they're reading and what they're passing out to people is based on the evidence.
I don't know whether it's just that skeptics tend to be quieter, whether the people who are more into non-scientific things tend to be quite vocal about these things, I think, whereas skeptics sort of just get on with it a lot of the time.
I think we're quite scared of coming off because obviously skeptic, especially in the UK, is thought of as being a cynic and just being like the sort of person who comes in and poo-poos everyone's ideas and is like, oh, this is all rubbish. And that's not what we're trying to do at all, but it's a fair stereotype because some of us are a bit obnoxious. So we do try to maybe we overcompensate by keeping quiet and not saying as much as we should. It's hard to frame a criticism in a constructive instead of just a mean way.
You said you went from vegetarian to vegan. What were those rational reasons that led you to do that?
Well, basically, I suppose it's interesting actually because I think I obviously knew. I was like in my mid-20s, so, I wasn't an idiot. I knew where eggs came from. But I hadn't quite put it together that chickens had to die to give me eggs, because I became vegetarian when I was really young, when I was only 10 years old. And I was just like, killing animals is bad, I don't want to do that. And then I didn't think about it at all. I didn't reassess my position. I thought, well, that's it, dusted on my hands, I'm all done. I've made the ethical choice as far as food goes. And then when I started thinking about skepticism, when I started thinking skeptically, I just slowly overturned every area of my life and looked carefully at it. And that was one of the big things that stood out to me. I was like, oh my God, I've been making this really silly mistake, not thinking, maybe dairy isn't the nicest industry. And as soon as you look into it, of course, you find out that it's absolutely horrific. And then you don't have any choice.
Yeah, I suppose no matter what your reason is for being vegetarian, the rational conclusion is to become vegan, isn't it?
Yeah, I can't, I can't think of a...
You just don't like meat.
yeah, I guess that's one, yeah. But it's weird, it's like it's a very normal thing. I've met lots of vegetarians who are like that, who just go vegetarian when they're really young and then just don't think about it. It becomes a habit that they don't think about. And then when they meet a vegan, they're forced to think about it.
Yeah, I was one as well, yeah. Just at 8 years old, I didn't want to eat meat. It's yucky, it's wrong to kill, yeah. You just, you can't give a lot of critical thought to a topic when you're a child, really.
Yeah, exactly. How long did it take you to click the vegan thing?
Probably about 10 years later, 10, 12 years later. Just, again, it was the initial disgust of it. I never liked meat, and the disgust of milk and eggs and where they had come from.
Yeah.
And thereby, there isn't a slight ethical component to that where you... it seems wrong. It just somehow seems like the wrong thing to be doing. And then, of course, once you realise that it's needless exploitation and suffering, that just confirms it almost.
I almost feel like I'm quite embarrassed to say this, but I think I was aware of it, but I deliberately didn't think about it too much, about eggs and milk, for quite a few years. Or if I think too hard about that subject, I'm going to have to change the way I live. And I don't really want to do that, so I kind of walled it off in my head. I deliberately cultivated, well, not deliberately, maybe deliberately, cultivated cognitive dissonance around that particular subject. I'm not going to go there, I'm not going to look into it.
I think that's very common, to be honest. I think, for me, veganism was one of my first rational and critical thinking processes. Because I brought up a Christian, and it was one of my first sort of forays into skepticism, doing the same sort of thing. Oh, actually, if I'm vegetarian and I don't want to cause suffering, then why am I drinking milk and eating eggs? And it was very rational.
Once you're on the other side of that, it seems so obvious.
Yes.
It's hard to, and it is embarrassing to think for such a long time. I just didn't see it. I was a grown person who didn't think about where my milk or eggs came from. But that's one of the things I have, I try and keep in my mind when I'm speaking to people about these issues, because it is so easy after you've been vegan for however long to forget what it was like to not be vegan, and how much, our culture just kind of brainwashes you into thinking it's absolutely fine to do what we do.
Yeah, it's cultural, like you say. If you do care about other animals to any degree, you go vegetarian. It's just the thing everyone does if you can. It needn't be the first step, but it just happens to be.
Yeah.
And often people will defend vegetarianism as say it's the first step, but you can think critically about that and why it should be. You may as well just give up eggs, or you could just say, I'm just going to give up milk and cream or something. It's almost as random to focus on one animal product.
Yeah, I was thinking it might be useful to make a list of, or maybe not, to make a list of the amount of suffering caused by each animal product, and then if you did want to go and do it in steps, you could at least do it in rational steps. So, chicken and fish would probably be high up there. And then I don't know how it would go. I haven't really looked into it.
Depends if you do the individuals, or if you're looking into
numbers.
Or the
really
ability to cognitive ability. I don't know how you do it. It's so we can't put ourselves in their position, really.
Yeah,
but it makes sense. Numbers would be probably
marine animals would be top. In case of. Well, they're all grouped together.
Thing, isn't it? Well, maybe it goes. Yeah, it's completely irrational. The order, it's just culturally. And then the other funny thing is, if you go to other countries where they don't have such a history of vegetarianism, I feel like, and again, this is just, I don't know if this is true. I haven't checked the data. They are more quick to go to vegan because they don't have that in-between step of vegetarianism, because they don't have the cultural. The Vegetarian Society has been around here for such a long time, and the whole vegetarian movement started. Well, obviously there were vegetarians in, Buddhist countries and in ancient Greece. But the modern vegetarian movement started in the UK, and we kind of it's just built into our society that vegetarian is something you do, and it's a very normal, natural thing. The fact that we could make that decision, I was 10, Marcus was 8, that was a word we knew and we could do it. So it's just easy in a way that veganism isn't. But if you don't have that, if vegetarianism didn't exist, maybe people would go straight to veganism. I don't know.
Depends on the culture, because I grew up in Hong Kong, and the culture there is there isn't really a vegetarian. There's Buddhism, and in Hong Kong the Buddhism is plant-based. Whether it's vegan through ethics is sort of not necessarily, but it is. All the monasteries you can go and get vegan food there. They're all 100% vegan. But so there is less vegetarians than there are vegans, but whether they're at the same time whether they're actually vegans or plant-based is really hard to figure out, whether the actual ethics are there behind it, or whether they just abstain from animal products.
I think there's some statistics saying that China has the most vegetarians, and obviously it's just a huge population, and I would guess they're largely Buddhist people. Oh, but do people ever claim it has the most vegans?
I think they do, but then that makes
They're
sense.
talking about the Buddhists. They're talking about the Buddhists again. Maybe there's a more ethical veganism in China than we know of. I don't know.
It's really hard to decide because even within Western societies, you get people who say, oh, well, I'm vegan, oh, but I eat honey.
If you're just using self-reported data, you really don't know what people mean when they say I'm vegan or I'm vegetarian.
Yeah.
And even if, I think people's standards differ. So in some places, you say you're vegan and you eat honey, and everyone's like, fine, yeah, that counts. And to you and I, we might say, well, you're not vegan because that's an animal product. So it's like, it's just a really fuzzy, like the word seems so clear-cut from a distance, but once you get close and you start examining it, it's actually quite a fuzzy concept. That's something that I've realised in the last few years of writing and thinking about veganism more intently.
And it's quite modern, of course, just 1940s was the term coined. So I would assume, like, for someone to be a vegan, you would be, reenacting the ideology laid down by Donald Watson and co. in the mid-1940s. But then you could say some people have been eating plant-based for thousands of years, or it just gets complicated on what you consider veganism to be. Yeah.
Wellness salute, this Stickman from Dead Prez, shouting out 107.3 FM. You are listening to The Species Barrier. Rise up.
The World Peace Diet is a popular book that references stereotypically New Age ideas such as vibratory fields, an inherent purpose to life, etc. Is this harmful to the credibility of veganism or merely pragmatic in reaching a certain audience?
That is a tricky question. So as you say, it is a really popular book, and Will Tuttle is really influential. My partner is South African, so I spent a month or so there over Christmas time, and he was there, Will Tuttle was there. We spent some time with the South African vegans. Everyone was talking about him. He's a big deal there. And then me and Marcus were just saying before the show started that he was at the Brighton Veg Fest, which we both attended. So yeah, he's a big deal. And he's inspiring people to go vegan, so it's hard to say what he's doing is bad. I don't think what he's doing is bad. I also don't think that he's just being pragmatic. I think he's really genuinely sincere in what he says. But I do think, so his book, The World Peace Diet, the subtitle is Eating for Spiritual Health and Social Harmony. That's not a book I would necessarily pick up. It's not even a book I would think would be about veganism, because I don't see what spiritual health, I don't know, it's just odd. So I had a look for you guys in preparation. I only read one chapter, The Metaphysics of Food, and pretty much like you said, Ruth, he covers a lot of those kind of New Age ideas, vibrationary fields and things like that. It's all under a big rubric of New Age. So if it's okay with you guys, I'd prefer to just talk about kind of New Age ideas in general rather than his book, because I'm not super familiar with it, and I don't want to criticize something that I'm not that familiar with. Is that okay?
Yes, no, it's just the general idea that he could just be seen as a symbol of, that's all.
Yeah, that's what I think, yeah. So I grew up with all of these New Age ideas buzzing around me. My stepmom was a spiritual healer, so I was at the spiritual fairs, and while she was doing her healing, I'd be walking around and looking at the crystals, getting free tarot card readings, because I was a kid of one of the people doing the stuff, so I was really immersed in it, and I believed a lot of it, almost all of it in fact, but as, uncritically. It's a really attractive set of ideas, especially if you're kind of feeling a bit lost and like you don't have any control of your life. All these ideas they feel really positive. I think it's a messy grouping, like New Age. You find all sorts of stuff there. So it's like Reiki, but then there's also people who have a particular saint that they pray to and they see messages from him, or you see people do seances. There's like everything there. So when I think about it, I tend to see it as broken down into like 3 foundational categories, which sort of everything springs from, which I think are vitalism, the prioritizing intuition over reason, and positive thinking. Those are the 3 kind of core principles. I'll chat about each of them if you listen.
Yeah, absolutely.
So vitalism, that's kind of like the idea that there's a supernatural component to the universe. There's like our natural world, and then there's also a supernatural world. It'd be like chi, or spirits, or energy, just that kind of vague term, energy, all those sort of things. So the funny thing about that whole idea is if there is this kind of weird supernatural element to the universe, then it either doesn't interfere with the real world at all, making it completely irrelevant. It's there, but we never notice it. It doesn't interfere with us. It's just there. So that's not really interesting to talk about. or it does interfere with the real world, and we can use it, we can direct it, you know, it comes through some people and gives them powers and stuff. And if that's true, then it should be measurable. But unfortunately, no one has ever been able to reliably measure this force, which leads me to think, since there's no evidence to support that it exists, that it probably doesn't. So that foundation that a lot of those supernatural or, you know, New Age ideas come from is all about this material. Well, it's not really a material, it's a, you know, essence that they think permeates the world. And I think the problem with that is that if we imagine a supernatural world, it kind of minimizes our experience in the real world. So there's this world, and we've got no evidence it exists, it's completely imaginary, and yet it's somehow seen as more important or more special or more significant than our real world. And as vegans, or as social justice advocates of any stripe, really, what we care about is the suffering of people and animals in this material, real world. And I don't think vegans should really waste time arguing for the rights of spirit animals. Just, you know, I'm not a fan of vitalism. The other thing I said was the way they prioritize intuition over reason. And sometimes they talk about this as prioritizing the female over the male, which I find offensive for many reasons. But that aside, I just think one of the things that I learned through skepticism is to pay really close attention to my biases and my own sort of thinking patterns that can trip me up and make me make mistakes. Because our brains are not infallible. They've evolved to solve problems well enough to survive, but not to give us like a perfect picture of the world. So that's why we invented the scientific method and why reason is useful to us in logical arguments. So that idea that intuition trumps reason is kind of, to me, it seems kind of arrogant to say what I feel is more important than what you think or what the evidence shows. And again, if you think of it in a vegan way, reason is really good for veganism, because if we just went with our intuition, we'd probably all eat meat, because that's what our cultures do, that's normal. So if we just went with what we feel like doing, then I think we'd be in trouble. In fact, that's what we do when we're young, isn't it? We just do what we feel like doing until we start thinking more closely about it, and then we decide to go vegan. So the idea of prioritizing intuition over reason, I think, is problematic for loads of reasons. And it undermines science, which, as a fan of science and the scientific method, I think is really bad. It's bad for the world because science has given us medicine and technology. I mean, I don't need to list all the things that science has given us, it's kind of obvious. But it's also bad for veganism because science supports our arguments. Like, you know, obviously, once you accept the theory of evolution, then it's hard to justify why would we think that animals were any less important or feel any less than we do? It makes no sense. And then in more modern science, of course, like, for example, in 2012, the Cambridge Declaration of Consciousness, where a consensus of scientists, neuroscientists, came together and said that they think, based on the evidence, that animals, almost all animals, I don't think they got into the really tiny animals, but pretty much all animals have consciousness. That's a scientific fact. If we start undermining science and say, oh, you know, actually we should go with how we feel over what science says, I think that's dangerous. And so that kind of idea of prioritizing intuition over reason, I see a lot in the New Age movement, and I think it's problematic. And so there's this idea, I mean, I've probably said it, you guys have probably said it, if we were all more in touch with our empathy, do you think we'd all be vegan? Does that sound familiar to you guys?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I think on the face of it, that seems really, you know, that seems really simple. Empathy is what makes us care about animals and stuff, and it's what makes us care about other people. It's a lovely emotion. Hooray for empathy. We should prioritize that. But actually, when you start exploring what empathy is, it's developed to make us look after the people close to us. And so you notice people feel more empathy for people who look like them, for their same race, who are physically close to them, their family. Feeling empathy for things like octopuses, who look so alien and weird, kind of gross, it's really hard. So again, it's just another example of where prioritizing intuition over reason really shoots us in the foot as vegans. And then the third thing is positive thinking, which is, again, a lot of kind of pseudoscience-y type things are based on this idea that you can just wish something to happen. So if you're doing a spell, that would be an example of positive thinking. If you're trying to pray to make the world a better place, that would be an example of positive thinking. Then there's like The Secret, all those sort of things. But if there's no supernatural force, as we discussed when we talk about vitalism, then there's absolutely no mechanism for positive thinking to work, because what would you be manipulating? There's no supernatural energy that I can send somewhere or it doesn't make any sense. So there have been studies in things like intercessory prayer, and they find no effect, or a very small effect that disappears when the studies are done in more rigorous settings. And I just think that the time and energy wasted in trying to think the world better could be spent actually doing stuff. I mean, like science, medicine, technology, and ethical philosophy, of course, to actually make the world better. So this idea that we can kind of imagine the world a better place and, you know, just sit quietly in our rooms and meditate, it might be good for us. I'm sure it is good for us. In fact, I meditate regularly. I think it is good for people. It's calming. But what we can do to make the world a better place is change people's perceptions and try and make them change their behaviour. Those are measurable things that can have impact on reducing suffering, and I think we need to put them above absolutely everything else.
Like you said there, the Cambridge Declaration of Consciousness actually backs up our position and is really good foundational science for a vegan argument.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the World Peace Diet book is critical of people like Descartes for giving the idea that other animals are unfeeling machines. So what would you say to that kind of argument from the animal advocates who have those reservations over the morality of science?
Well, I think it's a bit unfair to equate Descartes with science. He's like a philosopher from God, you know, I don't know, way back when. He's not science. Science is a method that we use to evaluate evidence and to rigorously examine the world around us, come up with hypotheses, test them, and then slowly put together a sort of provisional body of knowledge. Science is the method. Science isn't one individual, and it isn't any conclusion. I think it's unfair to say this guy was an unpleasant character, and he was. I mean, what he did, or what he reportedly did, we don't know exactly, was pretty grim. But I think it's unfair to say that he did these bad things to animals, and therefore all of science is terrible and cruel to animals and just the worst. I think science is constantly improving, and as you say, the Cambridge Declaration of Consciousness, that came through science, that came through a rigorous examination of evidence of people who were, you know, committed to finding the truth about this issue. And that's what science will always eventually do. And of course it'll make mistakes along the way. But the cool thing about science is it has a self-correcting mechanism in it, because everyone keeps on going back over the evidence and re-examining. So I'm not a scientist, but as far as I understand, as a science fan, when you put out a study, other people will look at your data and then do that study again and check it. So it's the community of scientists are always examining their previous assumptions and their previous work and trying to correct it and move towards something that's closer to the truth, or a close approximation of the truth. And I just think it's ridiculous to say that science is bad for veganism, especially based on one philosopher from the Dark Ages, maybe not the Dark Ages, whenever he was from.
Yeah, so on that theme, you mentioned Brighton Vegfest, and Will Tuttle was quoted on his talk there as saying that to have a materialist worldview or view of the universe is to display a carnivore mentality. I wonder what you think about that.
Well, I'm not sure what it means to start with. Do you think he meant materialist as in what I am, as in I don't believe in supernatural things?
I think he's talking of reductionist science, you know, where you've removed ideas such as empathy or compassion, etc.
Okay.
And you're just seeing everything as atoms and nuclei, etc.
I don't think there's anyone doing that.
No.
But I'm not sure what a carnivore mindset would be or how it would be related to. I think it's tricky. I think what he's doing there, and it's not necessarily he's doing it on purpose, but it's a common thing people do, is they're using words or concepts that sound bad, and people will listen to them in the audience and go, yeah, materialism, that sounds terrible, that kind of associated with greed, or maybe, as you say, like not having emotions or whatever. And carnivore, we're all vegans here, we all agree that's bad, ooh, and we can get, into that. But what he's doing is he's slipping premises past behind that language. He's slipping a premise past that says you have to believe in some kind of non-material element to the universe to be a compassionate person. I don't think that's true. He's equating science with something that it's really not. Like, materialism is the methods that science used to understand the world. We focus on the material, of course we do. That doesn't mean we don't fall in love and all those things, of course we do. Like, it's just when we try and understand the world, we focus on, because we're trying to understand the material world, we focus on the material sciences. And I just don't like the idea of saying anyone or anything has a carnivore. It just sounds like an insult to me. I think I would have felt slightly personally affronted if he'd said that to me. Maybe he wouldn't have said it on an interpersonal level. It's clearly just rhetoric to some extent.
Yeah. Also, it's creating an unnecessary stigma against carnivorous animals, because obviously
That's a really good point.
carnivorous animals, a lion or an alligator, they don't have any ill intent or bad character traits. They're just evolved to be carnivores. And
that's true, but they're also materialists. They don't believe in God or ghosts, so maybe he's right. I don't know.
maybe they do, we don't know.
That's what they may well. They say that elephants go back and visit the graves of their dead loved ones, don't they? So
Yeah.
There are many billions of religious people, and this doesn't look set to change anytime soon, not least because there aren't many, if any, atheist missionaries. Can we reach the devout with a rational vegan message?
well, I think there are atheist or at least humanist or secular missionaries. It's Sunday today. I went to a thing earlier today at lunchtime called the Sunday Assembly, which is kind of like a humanist or a secular church where we gather and talk about kind of ideas like compassion, or it's based around a theme. It's lovely. We have a meditation moment. It's great. I bring vegan cake and get a chance to talk to everyone about veganism, which they all appreciate. So yeah, there's a growing secular, humanist, atheist movement in the world, and we kind of are missionaries. I don't think we should give up. So I don't think we need to pander to religious people. Religious people use secular ethics every day to make decisions in their lives. For example, in the Bible, there's several passages that endorse slavery. For example, in the Old Testament, there's rules about how you treat your slaves, when they should be beaten, when they shouldn't be beaten, all sorts of that things, when you should put a hole in their ears to mark them as slaves. In the New Testament, there's comments about how slaves should be obedient and obey their masters. And in Jesus himself, he uses the example of slaves in parables, and he recommends that in certain situations they should be beaten and killed. So Christianity, if they were just reading from the book and using their ethics from that book, they would be fine with slavery. But actually, Christians during the anti-slavery movement in America were part of the people standing up for slaves and campaigning for abolition. So that was an example of secular ethics overriding their sacred text, which I think is amazing. It proves that Christians, and indeed all religious people, are perfectly capable of understanding a secular ethical message. There's an amazing writer called Kim Soka. I don't know if you've heard of her.
We're actually going to divide Will Tuttle's interview into two parts, and then Kim Soka's going to be the response in the second episode.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
She's an amazing woman. You'll enjoy speaking to her. So she wrote a book called Animal Liberation and Atheism, and she points out that religion, all religion pretty much, endorses human supremacy. And human supremacy is like the first building block of speciesism. Mm-hmm. So the idea that religious people could pick and choose little bits and bobs of their text to support an argument for veganism is kind of ridiculous, because the whole premise of religion is human supremacy. So I think when you speak to people, whether they're religious or not, or wherever they come from, you can just talk about the issue of veganism and promote critical thinking about the issues, and they will be open to it or closed to it based on all sorts of things. But the important thing is just to tell the truth. And then if they retreat into excuses based on their religion or any other thing, that's when you start talking about skepticism and critical thinking and how they should evaluate those assumptions they have about the world, and hopefully move them towards a more kind of realistic assessment of the world they live in on every issue, not just veganism. Obviously, veganism is something I feel passionate about because I care about the suffering of animals, but having a skeptical worldview and learning critical thinking skills has made my life so much better in every arena, because I suddenly have this opportunity to make rational decisions about medicine, politics, environmental issues, and my life, which I didn't have before. And I want to give other people that opportunity. And I don't think I should try and patronize or, trick religious people by using their language. I just think talk to people like they're grown-ups. They are. Let them make their own decisions.
So where can listeners find your work? What's the website URL?
Our URL is rvgn.org, and our Twitter is rvgn_org. And we have different essays a couple of times a month from all sorts of reasonable vegans from all over the world, talking about all these sort of issues that we've discussed and many more. And hopefully we're going to build it, as I said earlier, into something even bigger and more exciting.
Rebecca recently conducted an in-depth interview with previous Species Barrier guest David Benatar. You can find it at her website Reasonable Vegan. Rob Johnson is author of the book Rational Morality, A Science of Right and Wrong, and like Rebecca believes that spiritual arguments don't hold up to rational scrutiny. Welcome back to the show, Rob. Can you tell us a little bit about your book Rational Morality, A Science of Right and Wrong?
Hiya, thanks for having me on. Sure, it's basically an attempt to show that you don't need unfounded spiritual or otherwise made-up assumptions in order to provide a theory of morality, including animal rights and environmentalism, obviously. Moral philosophy usually bases theories of morality on made-up assumptions, such as that our intuitions explicitly reference moral fact, or that selfish decisions are somehow factual themselves. It's possible to have a mutually fulfilling consensual theory of morality, though, that's neither explicitly selfish nor based on anti-intellectual myths. Also, of course, in the book I argue that spiritual conceptions of morality are failing to motivate society, that we're an increasingly secular society, and that magical thinking, whether it be religious or otherwise disprovable, no longer has a strong effect on society. So we actually need a rational theory of morality in order for people to take moral responsibility seriously in modern society, rather than trying to get people to think magically in order to treat people and animals nicely, which is some people think and some people do, really.
So why is rationality important?
Well, I think most people in society know why rationality is important. We're speaking right now via phone lines based on so many different types of technology, which all work and are tested based on causal scientific laws, which simply wouldn't work if rationality was just a perspective. It's just rationality is almost just the acceptance of and subsequent use of causality in explaining how the world works. If we were all sitting around as new creations of some god on an earth newly made and free of man-made structures, then it might be sensible for us to assume that rationality was just a theory, just like any form of spiritual thinking. But we don't live in that world. We live in the world of mobile phones, supercomputers, advanced engineering, etc. These things wouldn't work if actions and events were not causally determined. If electrics occasionally just disconnected or randomly and for no reason floated off into space, you couldn't even research computers, let alone build models which work for years.
So, does rationality compel us to go vegan, and if so, why?
Well, it's hard to say whether it does or doesn't. We don't know anything compels people to go vegan en masse just yet. I think rationality has a better chance because of what I said before. Society has become more rational, and things like our access to Google means we request explanations for things rather than just accepting what people tell us, like primitive humans did when they thought, a ball of fire in the sky wanted us to do something, or things of that kind of level. But now we want reasons that make sense. But I think most activists already use rationality to try and convince people to go vegan. They talk about suffering and sentience and terrible conditions, etc. These might not be good tactics, but they at least are grasping at rationality, grasping at making rational arguments that might persuade people. I think what the activists tend to not be so good at is using rationality to examine their own tactics, to ask why, for example, welfare regulation might not be a good idea, or why individual chickens might not suffer any less just because they have 8 inches more space. But as I said earlier, rationality provides reasons and pays people the respect of giving them explanations rather than providing unprovable moral laws like love, compassion, or other misplaced emotional appeals. People can and do think they are loving and compassionate people, and given there is no rational reason why compassion should mean going vegan, the argument in modern society fails. So we need rational arguments in vegan activism, and I think most people already agree with that.
What led you to go vegan? Was it a decision you made on rational grounds?
Yeah, I don't think I'm a normal case, but I went vegan while studying philosophy. So reading through things like Peter Singer, then arguing based on the kinds of ideas that he puts forward, arguing with people you know and coming to the conclusion that you can't win the argument anymore unless you go vegan. So kind of arrogant and not a nice way to go vegan, but hey. It was still pretty scary because I was brought up on an egg farm, so it's not in my blood, and going vegan felt like a huge leap in the dark at the time.
So what kind of reactions has your rational approach received from different audiences?
Well, I don't argue for veganism on its own, so it's hard to say. I put it in the context of other causes and other concepts, so arguing we must consider, for example, veganism for the same reasons we must consider anti-theism or environmentalism, or for the same reason that animal advocates must consider the problems with single-issue campaigning or welfare regulation, things like that. I think that's a reasonably effective method, as it puts the need for veganism as part of a search for truth, rather than as sort of a single cause that you're trying to advocate to people and tell them to do. But I have no idea if it's been successful or very effective I'll put a poll out on the next article, maybe, something like that.
How does your rational approach differ from other animal rights theories?
Well, I think I've summed it up probably a little bit already, putting veganism and animal rights in the context of scientific laws and other rational causes, really, rather than keeping it out on its own. But I suppose also in that there's nothing set in stone in the opinions that I write down, that, especially about animal rights. So my theory would change based on new evidence or new reason that someone brings up. I think any theory should continue to do that, but you don't see, say, the most famous and thus older animal rights theory changing very much over time. You see them staying the same, often in spite of new evidence. For example, if you think of Peter Singer and the arguments for welfare regulation.
Prominent atheists such as Sam Harris and Dawkins have admitted that speciesism is a non-rational prejudice. Darwin showed us to be animals, so why do many secularists continue to struggle with affording consideration to other species?
That's a good question, really. I think it's interesting. You don't see many areas of academia where the well-known names actually drop the nonsense arguments about animal rights. I think as secularists in general are science advocates, it means their positions change constantly anyway. So we have everything from physics to evolutionary biology changing constantly based on the newest tests or the newest evidence or anything anyone's discovered. So it's no surprise that they're a group who are showing signs of changing on animal ethics too. However, on the other side of things, you still have people like Sam Harris, as you've mentioned there in his book The Moral Landscape, propping up manufactured ideas of moral philosophy like moral realism. Moral realism claims essentially that there are universal objective moral facts. That's not a scientifically justifiable statement, and that people like Harris still don't necessarily adopt a rational theory of morality means they can still technically compartmentalize moral decisions to avoid changing them like they would their scientific views. So if secularists and rationalists all became secular and rational about morality, moral views would change quickly and constantly like science does.
Aren't we emotional animals, though? Won't appealing via solely rational criteria limit our appeal?
Yeah, sure, but there's nothing wrong with using emotion per se. You just have to be careful you're not allowing that emotion to bias your method or allowing it to bias people into accepting your position but rejecting others based on the importance that you gave emotion. I think it's a pragmatic and individual decision how you push certain ideas or how you advocate for them. However, the overall trend has to be toward rational and critical thinking and striving for truth over personal feelings. Otherwise, the next moral causes get impacted negatively. For instance, if you're confirming someone's own bias towards their emotions to guilt them into going vegan, you might accidentally be confirming their bias towards their emotions, which is to hate gay marriage or something like that. So you have to be really careful not to fall into short-term pragmatism at the expense of long-term effect, which, again, is very easy for humans to do as we can't easily see long-term trends like we do immediate reactions.
So what of ideas like compassion and emotional intelligence? Do you think they have a place?
To a degree. First of all, it depends if you're accepting a rational theory of morality, I guess. Obviously, the theory that I've written about is very much my theory, and it's not as well read as some of the major animal rights players at the moment anyway. So, I mean, if you're taking my theory, you probably wouldn't be arguing based on compassion anyway, because it's not a great argument, it's not very effective. So although it might get, say, 1 in, 5,000 people you speak to might go vegan based on that, or 1 in 5,000 that the media that you're using reaches, it's not going to convince people en masse. It's not a particularly rational thing to be arguing. Someone's hearing, for instance, go vegan because it's a compassionate thing to do. There's no evidence that it is a compassionate thing to do. If someone thinks they're being perfectly compassionate already, then there's no reason that in their mind they should do it anyway.
So what is the harm in using spiritual arguments and biblical texts such as thou shalt not kill or the diet laid down in the Garden of Eden being plant-based, etc.? Isn't that just pragmatic?
Yeah, I mean, that comes back to the same point. It's all very well arguing for animal rights from a biblical perspective. You might even guilt a few people into veganism, obviously, but at what price? We think the Bible outlaws homosexuality, and many Christians also think that there will be a second coming to save us, and so we shouldn't worry about environmentalism. Are these things you want to implicitly accept in your activism? But, I mean, moreover, if you use arguments for veganism from a religious or spiritual perspective, then any kind of media attention you get, and you do need media attention in the modern world to have any kind of success in any community, then you're giving our increasingly secular society another reason to reject veganism when they see it connected to something they don't believe. Similarly, if someone truly reasons spiritually, and believing in their own emotions as a moral guide, etc., then why on earth would rational arguments based on spiritualism or religion be effective anyway? Remember that there are several groups who have used religious and spiritual reasoning to argue for veganism, and none have had any more success than the driven single-issue campaigns that the likes of PETA or Animal do. So in the past, people of a religious ilk were usually last to move to new moral trends. So sure, there are outliers with devout and influential religious faith who have helped to lead new moral causes, but in general the church has been dragged into accepting new moral beliefs after the less devout have forced them to, at risk of becoming completely irrelevant. I don't see why modern society, when most religious groups in the world are still heavily on the right wing of politics, whether it be Christians or Muslims still heavily opposing women's rights or LGBT equality, I don't see how anything's changed. The religious influence in society still drags backward and against progress. If you know a progressive religious person who is influenced by rational arguments rather than just religious ones, someone who believes in evolution, champions gay marriage, women bishops, or climate change, and I'm not sure you need to use religious arguments anyway, as their other views clearly weren't taken from religious communities or the Bible. If they're using the Bible to defend their animal use when they ignore it on other issues, it's really an excuse, not a reason. And I think that goes for spiritual communities too. I mean, if you consider Will Tuttle, who I know you've had on, he talks a lot about the intelligence of animals and uses evolution, he uses the word, evolution a lot too. These are things other spiritualists could and do reject, and if they have no belief in science, no belief in the causal nature of the universe or the need to be consistent that goes with it, then he has no way to persuade these other spiritualists. So these are not good ideas for animal rights, just as Trumps are not good ideas for politics. They're opinions based on nothing but assumptions, and they quickly go out of fashion.
So you mentioned our guest, Will Tuttle, there. At the Brighton Veg Fest, he spoke about having a materialist view being akin to a carnivore mentality as a kind of slur by association. What do you think of that?
Well, it's a strange argument, isn't it? First of all, I'm not quite sure what the relation is. Having a materialist view of the world and therefore believing in things that you can test and prove exist, I think is the mainstream view, and I think it would be bizarre to then say, well, first of all, to use the word carnist rather than speciesist, I think tells you something about that particular view, given that most of us who've been looking at animal rights for a while have noticed that the term speciesism really sums up things a lot better than carnism. But anyway, that point aside, I can't quite see how having a materialist worldview and therefore trusting your senses, trusting tests and reliability and evidence and hypotheses, trusting these things rather than just trusting what Will Tuttle tells you based on the fact he's written it in a book, based on the evidence that he says it can't be proved, so therefore let's drop the materialist worldview. That's quite a weak position in my opinion. I'm not sure it's got anything to do with carnism, as you might call it, or veganism.
I think it's that idea of the cold, rational scientist and having no emotional, like we said before, emotional intelligence and compassion. I think that's what he's tapping into, isn't it? That kind of anti-science kind of view.
He has been consistently holding this kind of opinions for a long while since I've known that he exists anyway. But yeah, it's happening in a lot of US society at this minute. There's this distrust of experts, distrust of knowledge, distrust of intelligence, distrust of progress, really. Everyone wants to stay exactly as they are. Everyone wants to have an opinion that's either educated or not educated, and they want to keep their opinion regardless of what anyone tells them. It's a very anti-intellectual and quite damaging sphere to US society, so it's not surprising he thinks that. Obviously, he's using it to advance veganism, whereas everyone else is using it to advance their own opinions, such as Donald Trump, obviously, who I've mentioned already, using it to, attack just about everyone except rich white men, really.
So where can listeners find out more about your work?
Well, Rational Morality is out now, so they can feel free to buy that. Yeah, I've got another one coming out, hopefully later in the year, a book on critical thinking and essays that encourage critical thinking, which is illustrated by a good friend of mine. So, we'll have two sources that readers can read later in the year.
And what's the name of your website and your publishing house?
My website is robertjohnson.org.uk. I'm also commissioning editor with Ockham Publishing, who is a popular science and popular philosophy publisher.